Kia ora koutou, ko Jason Kiss toku nua. He kai tohu pairawa tukutuku toku tua mahi ke te punaha matehiko aho e mahiana. My name is Jason Kiss. I am a web standards consultant at the Government Digital Delivery Agency, which is a new agency where the Government Chief Digital Officer of New Zealand is now settled, which is part of the Public Service Commission, as if you wanted to know all of that. So I'm going to be talking about CWACK, Centralized Web Accessibility Checker, and accessibility. Most of you probably have an idea of what accessibility is, but I find it's always good to just do a quick refresher. Accessibility, in some ways it's a horrible word because it means so many different things, but in our digital context, or at least the context I work in, accessibility means something specific, and that's usability for disabled people, right? So making sure that people with impairments are not disabled by our design decisions, basically enabling them to do all of the other things that everybody else does equitably. In New Zealand, we have about 17% of the population who self-identifies as having a disability. The numbers go up when you start to talk about Maori, and certainly a lot more intersectionality happens with the LGBTQIA+ group. So we have almost 30% of that group being impaired. The numbers in Australia guaranteed to be similar and a similar spread. Certainly, again, with the Indigenous people, you'd have a higher incidence of disability. I sort of alluded to this just a moment ago. Historically, we would think about disability on what we call the medical model. Disability is something that's wrong with the individual. It's an impairment, something that needs to be fixed, right? So in order for them to participate in society, we need to fix them medically somehow, because there's just something fundamentally wrong with them. We don't subscribe to that model anymore. We follow the social or the human rights model, where we see disability as a result of a lack of consideration, a lack of design, a lack of design decisions. Society is what disables people. If you think about, if you thought everybody in the world could not walk and we were all in wheelchairs, there would be no stairs, right? So you wouldn't have that disability present there. Disability is really something to be designed away, really, right? So impairments need to be designed for us to include them, people in society. And this point of view is entrenched in the New Zealand Human Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in the provision of goods and services. It's also in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which New Zealand has ratified, Australia has ratified, and this is an international obligation for governments that sign it to promote access for persons with disabilities to new information and communications technologies and systems, including the internet. So on top of our Human Rights Act, by which we need to make sure that disabled people aren't discriminated against, we also have these international obligations to make sure that we're doing everything we can as a government to ensure that disabled people can participate and use ICT, really. In New Zealand, we have the Web Accessibility Standard. This has been around since 2003, and it applies to public service departments, so not all of government, just the main core government agencies, but it applies not only to publicly facing websites, but also internally facing websites. So that we can hire disabled employees and ensure that they're able to do their jobs with our digital tools. What our Web Accessibility Standard does is the same that all other countries basically do, is refer to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from the W3C or WCAG, WCAG, and that's currently version 2.2. Just to give you a sense of what that is, if you haven't gotten acquainted with WCAG before, it's a number of principles under which there are a whole bunch of requirements, or what they call success criteria. One of the principles is operable, right? So user interface components and navigation must be operable to all users. So everything that you can do with a mouse, you need to be able to do with just a keyboard, right? A lot of people rely on keyboards. They can't use a mouse. They can't use their finger on a touch screen. Maybe they use speech recognition. So you have to make sure you code your HTML, your widgets, your control so that they're accessible, for example, so that they could respond to speech input, right? You don't make a button out of a div and just leave it like that and throw a JavaScript event handler on it. You have to add roles. You have to have accessible names so that speech recognition user can say the name of the control and activate it that way. So that's just a simple example of the sorts of things that accessibility addresses, or that WCAG addresses. Is the New Zealand government meeting the standard? Of course, the way to figure that out is to measure it, to test it. And in 2011, 2014, and 2017, we had agencies self-assess their websites. It's a big ask on agencies. Accessibility is about as technically complicated as security. And so asking communications advisors and others in small agencies to assess their websites against a technical standard like this was really difficult. And a recommendation was made to automate parts of that process. And so along comes CWACK, the Centralized Web Accessibility Checker. CWACK, obviously, where the duck comes from in the logo. This is just open source software that we've prepared. It's available on GitHub. It crawls websites and finds automatically detectable accessibility failures. As we built it, it was command line only. This all started in 2023. We wondered if we could use automated tools for simple but broad accessibility testing across the government system, the web properties. And there's lots of commercial options out there, SiteImprove, Acquia, which used to be called Moncito. These are tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars if you want to run them across all of your websites. And so we had no budget, so we decided to build our own. And this was really only possible because we had a colleague, a team member who was very capable in Python and was an eager developer. He did a lot of this on his own time, in fact. We were also able to convince the government chief digital officer of the value of this kind of tool, of getting this information, broad information across the system. And we also were able to go ahead with this because of free and open source software making this possible, especially Axe Core. Some of you may know Axe Core. This is from an accessibility company called DQ. It's an open source accessibility test engine, right? So it's just a bunch of rules that checks a web page's DOM for automatically detectable errors. That automatically detectable is really important. The nice thing about Axe Core compared to other similar services is that the rules don't generate false positives. You don't want to litter your list of issues to address with a whole bunch of false positives. And so Axe Core doesn't do that. You may have used these in the Axe DevTools plugin in your browser. Google Lighthouse also has Axe Core built into the accessibility performance measures that it does. CWACK has a few other rules that we custom built to test for accessibility. So WCAG requires that when you reduce your viewport to 320 pixels, that the web page doesn't require horizontal scrolling, right, to see any of the content. So we can check for that. We just reduce the viewport to 320, and we automatically check, programmatically check for horizontal scrolling. Of course, that doesn't mean that there's necessarily an error. You have to go and check manually. One of the nicer ones we have is a keyboard focus indicator test. WCAG requires that every element that receives keyboard focus has some kind of visible focus indicator, so a sighted keyboard user knows where they are on the page. CWACK takes a screenshot programmatically. It takes a screenshot and then presses the tab key and then takes another screenshot and looks for changed pixels. If there are no changed pixels, you're guaranteed there's no visible focus indicator. So 0 false positives, again, really good. Final test we have is a readability test. So CWACK scans each web page. It tries to collect an amount of text that it can legitimately test for readability, and it uses the Flesch-Kincaid and the simple measure of gobbledygook, SMOG algorithm. And so that's been really useful. Again, it's indicative only. You can't, these things, all they do is they check the number of words, the number of letters per word, the length of the sentence, that kind of thing, right? So a sentence could make 0 sense, but still qualify as really good plain language. And so again, indicative only. CWACK outputs data files for each test type that it runs. And it puts out a number of CSV log files. For example, lists all the URLs that were checked, unexpected HTTP response codes. So that's been handy. Some teams are enjoying getting lists of 404s, right, broken links. But there are also a number of other response codes that it checks. Sometimes agencies aren't even aware that some of their pages are down. And so we're able to help them that way. And then there's a very lengthy application log file, which is really useful for troubleshooting. We're using CWACK, again, to monitor government websites. So there are 43, I think, government agencies right now that are obligated by cabinet to meet the web standards, and we have another 3 or 4 that have decided to join the program. And so we're scanning about 500 websites every quarter, so every 3 months. 100 pages per website, And that's taking about 12 hours of a first scan. But this is giving us really broad insight, or data anyway, about how websites are performing with regards to automatically detectable accessibility errors, right? It also shows agencies where they can improve. Automated testing is limited. This is one key takeaway about automated testing, right? It only finds those errors that are automatically detectable, which is a significantly small subset of all the WCAG requirements and all the possible failures of WCAG requirements. So pages with 0 errors very easily could still fail WCAG, right? Because there are non-automatically detectable errors on there. Simple example, every image element needs an alt attribute, right? But you could have rubbish in that alt attribute value, right? And so just because you have a complete alt attribute value doesn't mean that the page is accessible or that image is accessible. We're publishing the CWACK results as open data to data.gov.nz, so this is quite a novel thing for us. Obviously, the whole point is open and transparent government. The other thing is that these result files that we get, we can't share them over email. We currently don't have an online location where we can put all of these, and easily have agencies access them. So for the easiest way for us to do it is just put it all up on data.gov and have agencies download it themselves and get it that way. So that's really good. This also allows additional use. I mean, it's the reason for open source, right? Enabling others to do things that we haven't foreseen or can't do ourselves. We've also got a CWACK score. So this is a formula, which I won't bother sharing with you. You can find it online. But it's really just a strict binary method. If a web page has just one automatically detectable error, the page is considered to have failed. So it's pretty blunt that way. And this is because you really don't know. Some accessibility errors are serious blockers. Some are just real nuisances. And a nuisance, though, can be a blocker to somebody. And so you really don't know the impact that an individual accessibility issue is going to have on an individual until you learn all those details about them. And so for that reason, an accessibility error, we just considering the whole page has failed. This score allows us to compare agencies and to compare websites. And it allows us to then measure improvement over time. I said this just 2 slides ago. Remember that automated accessibility testing is limited, right? So what is this score telling us? What is the score about? It certainly can't be an accessibility score or a WCAG compliance score, right? Because you could score 0 errors and still fail WCAG, right? So a website with lots of errors means the team did not take advantage of automated testing. That's our proposal for what CWACK scores mean. They're really a sign of, or an indicator of digital maturity, of how well an organization is using those automated tools that are available in order to prevent automatically detectable errors getting pushed to production, right? If you're using it well, you'll have 0 automatically detectable errors pushed into production. So it's about how well an organization is using the tools, not how well they're meeting WCAG or how accessible their websites are. The scores have enabled us to publish leaderboards on digital.gov.nz. And of course, the point of leaderboards is to generate some friendly competition, and they're certainly having that effect. Agencies are competing to move up the leaderboard, and overall, this means fewer accessibility barriers across the system, right? So here's the current agency leaderboard. The last scan we did on 30 March. Shows you the scores, but it also shows you the change from the previous quarterly scan. And so low scores are good, right? You want 0 automatically detectable errors. And so you can see some of the drastic changes that have happened in just the last 3 months because of the previous month's scores and how agencies wanted to move up the leaderboard. So, Ministry for Women and Statistics New Zealand has done some amazing work addressing the errors that CWACK found and provided that information to them. So some really major shifts there. Again, it doesn't mean those websites are accessible, but it means they're definitely more accessible than they were before, and that's the kind of progress we want to see. CWACK is built with Python and Selenium. Axe Core, as I mentioned, beautiful soup for parsing the HTML and pandas, and for just getting that data into tables and allowing comparison of data, and a whole bunch of other open source packages. We followed the New Zealand government open access and licensing framework, the software extension. So that's NZGOAL, NZGOAL-SE. And this is a framework that the New Zealand government came up with probably about 10 years ago, if not more, for releasing open source software, for government to release open source software. It includes this really handy guide for how to figure out what parts of your project need licensing, what kind of license, what exceptions apply, and how to apply that license after you've selected it. It recommends two, the MIT or the GPL, and it helps you decide between these two by saying an agency's choice should turn on the answer to this simple question: would you like everyone to be able to reuse other people's distributed adaptations of the source code in the future? And if yes, you want a general public license? And that we answered yes to that question, and so CWACK is licensed under GPL v3. We're continuing to keep CWACK open source. We continue to invite contributions from users and the community, and that's about whether it's features, bugs, or typos, anything. And we want to keep CWACK useful outside the government context. So as we're designing it, we're thinking about certainly how we can use it, but also we want to make sure it's designed in a way that doesn't prevent its easy use outside of a government context, so that other corporations, other agencies, design development firms, anybody could take this up and use it. We're going to continue, of course, to monitor publicly facing government websites. We're in the process of building a web UI. So actually that's already in place in a prototype, and so command line's no longer needed. It's really handy to have a web UI. And this is going to be especially important come July when we roll CWACK out to all government agencies. So right now, we're unable to do ad hoc scans for government agencies just because we don't have the capacity. Agencies find it challenging to download open source software and run it themselves, especially if they're not developers, right? And so providing this CWACK as a service is going to make that really easy. Agencies can just log in and run CWACK whenever they want. And so that'll come in July. Please get involved with CWACK if you're so interested. It's up on GitHub, gov.nz/CWACK. I'd be interested to learn if you see any kind of use for a tool like CWACK in the work that you do, or perhaps you already quite rightly integrate accessibility into your development and workflow already and into your CI, which is, of course, the better way to do it than running a scan after the fact, right? But in the case that you want comprehensive scan of a website, CWACK is a free and easy tool to use.
Thanks, Jason. The few sites I look after have been scanned and initially got some really bad results. We've improved those massively. But a lot of that came down to alt text. And I know there's some projects around, I've seen some blog posts about generation of alt text at scale using AI. And I'm just wondering, what's your impression of the results of that? And also, can you see a method of testing the quality of alt text? And whether it's relevant to the image or if it's just a placeholder or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Alt text is a good example of where AI would be helpful. Again, you're going to need the manual check because it's still just not reliable for describing images. The other issue with alt text is that you're not describing the image necessarily, you're replacing that image in the page with text, right? So if you couldn't have that image in the page, what text would you put there instead, right? It's not going to necessarily be a description of the colors used in the image, or what, like if you have I heart San Francisco, you don't necessarily, it's I love San Francisco is what the heart means, right? You don't describe a heart necessarily. So that's where you would need to be really careful about the context for the alt attribute value. But certainly AI would be helpful in that scenario. from a process point of view, alt text is the sort of thing that should come from the subject matter experts or the content author. So if you're getting content that doesn't have, with images that doesn't have an alt attribute value provided, go back to the content author, because they're the ones who selected that image and should know why or what it's doing in the page.
Any other question? I have one.
Great.
Everyone hosts a how
Yeah, that's been a real challenge for us. You're quite right. A lot of government agencies, not all of them, CWAC was able to access a lot of government agencies' websites, no problems, but a lot of them just blocked them outright. And so we've had to spend a lot of time chasing up agencies to get them to whitelist the IPs that CWAC is coming from, or to whitelist the user agent string that the CWAC bot is using. We've had chats with companies like Cloudflare about identifying the CWAC bot as a friendly bot. Those conversations unfortunately stalled. But also, for example, Silverstripe provides a lot of the infrastructure for government websites, and a lot of government agencies are using the Silverstripe's shared. Am I allowed to mention Silverstripe here? It just occurred to me. They have a shared WAF service that, so if we get them to include as IP addresses, all of those agencies' websites are sorted. But it's a real challenge. And that's something that we're constantly having to go back to agencies and constantly run checks on all of the websites to ensure that CWAC is still able to access them.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Kia ora.
Hello, Josh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, actually. It's a good question. Things are changing in the government. Historically, we've been rather devolved, right? And every agency is kind of doing its own thing. That's changing. The government chief digital officer moving to the Public Service Commission, which has some more central authorities, a better ability to leverage centralized decisions and kind of really direct agencies to borrow from shared solutions. So I think we're going to see more coherence and centralized solutions for government. What happens around accessibility testing and for that outside government, I suspect that most experts have solutions and tools, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like CWAC made that easier for them. How we go to providing CWAC as a service to non-government agencies, or if we do that kind of thing, or we haven't thought about that at all.
No?
Great.
Thanks,
No,
Jason.
here.
Thank you very much. Used to work for the state government in West Australia. Consultants. One of the things I wanted to say, have you had any contact with the Australian government on Drupal? Passion. Conversation.
Yes. Yeah. Early on in the project, the Digital Transformation Agency, DTA, was in touch, and they took it, and they were going to start and do some development work. And again, things kind of, we had different priorities. However, we meet regularly with DTA and Queensland and New South Wales governments, and we're constantly talking about CWACK and what they're doing and how they could take advantage of CWACK as well. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.